Well, cymbals are the most personal part of the drum kit for me, like everybody. And I notice sometimes if my cymbals get lost or don't make the flight and I have a show, I'm completely uncomfortable like a fish out of water playing somebody else's cymbals, whereas I'm so used to having to adjust to drum kits and being able to tune them, of course. So for me, it's my signature. And as a jazz drummer, I think when you're playing a lot of ride cymbal, it's more of your signature than when you're playing more groove music. So, you know, when I do gigs that are more groove-oriented, I don't feel as much like I have the same identity, you know, personal identity, as when I'm playing more creative, even more acoustic jazz, where I can really vary my touch a lot more. And I'm still working on it. I mean, it's funny. After playing, I've been playing, I guess, about 38 years now. And it's nice to still be able to define or refine something like touch. So I noticed these days I'm trying to get more sound even out of one cymbal. I think that the drum kit has one sound, and even though we have different tones on the drums and different tones on the cymbals, we're trying to create one sound. And especially, again, in acoustic music, or jazz for lack of a better word. For groove-oriented music, I have to change my thinking, and I have to put a lot more emphasis on say, my kick and snare. Whereas in jazz, I put more emphasis on my ride cymbal and just, you know, my cymbal sound in general, because that's constantly fluctuating with dynamics a lot more. So I do the same thing on the cymbals that I do on the drum kit, but I'm trying to make it all sound even in a sense, but not even, because to me music should never really sound even. I mean, to keep your ear focused and not to tune out any instrument. To me, you keep trying to make dynamic changes within phrases. Like, I don't mean like your obvious dynamic changes, like when you play really loud or you play really soft, but I mean within a phrase, so it's constantly moving like the ocean waves of sound. Sound waves, there's a concept. But you know what I mean, so so to me, like, if you can balance your kit, then that's like half of the battle of creating a sound, your own sound, finding your own sound. And through teaching, I found that that's problematic for some of my students. They're still young and maybe haven't focused on balancing their sound enough. So I'll hear one thing really standing out. Later, as you know, as I matured some, I tried to find a balance between dry and wet, and that's what led me to want to develop the high definition ride, because it still has spread, but it's still kind of dry at the same time. But it's funny because it really depends on the gigs that I'm doing and who I'm playing with at the time. The more I play less groove and more jazz, the more spread that I'm actually able to start to control. Whereas when I was playing heavier styles, I realized I couldn't control the spread as much, which is what made me want drier cymbals. But now I'm focusing a little more on how to control a cymbal with more spread. When you're playing the room, you adjust your levels, you adjust your own personal balance, but also I think if you're playing in an arena or a really large room, you're going to have cymbals with a little more, both definition and spread. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have a thin ride in a really big place because I think it will get washed. It'll get swallowed, the sound of it. But you know, in a small club, that works a little better for me. But also, it's also the player and the articulation and the touch. So you're constantly changing these things because a lot of times you're going tour with one set of cymbals and you play different size rooms, so you have to constantly change it, you know, with your own grip and touch as well. And I think you start to do these things without thinking about it, you know. But now that I'm teaching, I really have to talk about those things and really identify what I'm doing differently to play a room or to get this sound out of the cymbal. Like, you know, I might pinch the stick a little more to get a little more articulation, or I might loosen my thumb and fourth finger to get a little softer sound. Style of music really does dictate that. So I have all my students practice pretty much everything as loud as they can and as soft as they can, and really try to have the same amount of control at both volumes. So therefore, they're really working on their touch and sounding good at both ends of the spectrum. You can even play melodic phrases within the jazz ride, ostinato. It's not really ostinato anymore because you're constantly improvising based on the jazz ostinato. But when I say melodic phrases, I'd like to try to play in a way where, if I'm playing straight ahead, where the basic feeling that you hear underlying is but I'll do a lot of things with that, but you still feel like you're hearing that. So there's layers of sound. I hear three different sounds. I hear the basic, just the ride. Then I hear accents on the ride, creating almost a different melody across on top of the jazz ostinato. Then I'll hear that sound, which creates another sub rhythm or sub melody, if you will. Then I'll hear, and occasionally, that as well. So when you're mixing all those things, the idea is to never stop hearing the basic jazz ostinato. You want to still hear that. And these other things are kind of embellishing that. So that's what I mean by creating different melodies with just one cymbal. Now, of course, you start playing all these other cymbals, and a lot of times I'll be playing, even if it's a straight eighth song, I'll go back and forth between the two rides. I always play two rides. I try to look at it still as one sound, though. It's just, you know, it's nice if you can try to do that same thing with one cymbal, but since we have options. Roy Haynes has always been a big influence on me as well, and he was, you know, one of the first guys to really make the hi-hat stand out. Max Roach too, but you know, in modern jazz drumming, Roy really used the hi-hat like any other part of the drum kit, opposed to keeping the time on 2 and 4, and you know, I think that's, you know, was very influential on me. So I rarely play 2 and 4 with a hi-hat, and I use a lot of open hi-hats, something else that Jack does too, whether it's, you know, it could be ballads or regular time. And that's something I start seeing more contemporary drummers, groove drummers doing, is playing the hi-hat almost like a tom. So it's closed, but you're hitting it. So instead of going, you might go. For me, they just sound different, and I'm always at home with the Zildjian cymbal sound. And there's so many different sounds, that come out of the Zildjian factory that I'm still honing in on my own sound in a sense. But there's a warmth, to the cymbals that I'm used to, that I've played my whole life, and never really experimented much. So start with the best, stay with the best.